Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, well, telling the story of a man and two children traveling through 1950s Ontario seeking baseball card contracts in independent baseball. The Northern is a new novel by Jacob McArthur Mooney, and he joins me on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So, as you write in the historical notes and in the back, this is, other than one person in this book, Frank Leahy of O-Pee-Chee, everyone else is made up. And I'm curious, do you consider this a historical novel, like historical fiction, or like how do you make a distinction like that?
Sure, I think that it fits the definition of historical fiction as I've always thought about it, which is basically just an ethic where you learn as much as you can about a given time and place and the world that it exists in, and the concerns and the problems and the thoughts and the hopes of the time. And then you just sort of use that as a playground and do what you want in that space afterwards too. So it's a historical novel set in 1952 in Western Ontario, predominantly about Americans, but set in Canada. Everyone in it is fake, except for Frank Leahy, as you mentioned, too. But I did want to make sure that this is a book full of people thinking the thoughts and experiencing the sort of cultural environment that is as true to life as I can for the period that we're talking about.
Yeah, I was curious, like, how grounded you wanted these fictional characters to be, because as you write, Frank Leahy you treat as a cipher, that like you don't want him to have sharp edges or a lot of kind of description, but everyone else does.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just didn't want to get a phone call from his grandkids or something, yelling at me about getting something wrong, too, because he's a real person who lived in London and was the eventual president of O-Pee-Chee cards and confections, leading up into the purchase by Tops. But I think everyone else, they don't have grandchildren because they don't exist in the world.
Right.
So they're sort of fair game there too. And they sort of walk around Frank, who's sort of brought in for a scene. The characters happen to be in London, Ontario, in a novel about baseball cards in the early 50s. They really should knock on his door at some point because it's just too good to pass up. That he would be there and that O-Pee-Chee would be there too. But everything else sort of has sharper edges certainly, and kind of works around him in a way that he does it because trying to be respectful to the reality of him as a historical figure.
Yeah, no, obviously, like O-Pee-Chee has a sticky relationship with baseball cards, and the fact that the whole licensing question and duplicating kind of the stylistic choices of Tops versus what you're presenting is a fictional company, this Four Corners baseball card company that tried to compete against this duopoly. And I'm curious about kind of what led you to this as a topic. Like, I mean, obviously it's an inciting thing and it's what these three characters are here to do, but it's not necessarily the thrust of the novel. Like, I don't think the purpose is to like challenge duopolies.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Dave Jameson wrote a book for general readers. It's sort of the history of baseball cards in the U.S. Called Mint Condition, which is really great and super fun read too. And there's a throwaway line in there around licensing, and the idea of licensing is essentially it's tied to privacy rights, where this is American jurisprudence. It's not my area of expertise or anything, but as I should understand it as a layman coming in, everyone has privacy rights. By extension, they have the rights to forego that privacy and put their faces on things and get sort of recompensed for it too. And there was a big court case that is alluded to in a couple of different ways in the book that actually sort of is sorted out in the mid-50s, tied to baseball players using their faces to make money too. Once you sort of allow licensing as a thing, then it can be bought and sold too. And the company in the Northern, the fictional company in the Northern, doesn't have the money to walk into Yankee Stadium and go to the clubhouse and ask, Joe DiMaggio or someone for his face because it's going to cost too much. So their strategy is to go to the lowest rungs of baseball in this fictional league that we're spending our time in the book and ask them for a lot less money instead. And then it's sort of on spec, and then eventually, some of those players ideally make it to the majors, then you bought for $5 what would have cost you, 400 or 500 if you had done it direct from the source in a major league location too. But again, to your point, that's not what the book is about. That's the book's excuse for being, and that's sort of how we get to the characters and how we arrive into the story. It is a labor novel. It's a historical novel. It's a labor novel. It's a road novel. It's a coming of age novel too. But some of those things are really just kind of excuses to set the story versus kind of core heartbeats, I guess, for the book itself.
So which pulse was the inciting pulse then, right? Like, as you said, it's a road novel, it's a labor novel. Like, there's several different thrusts.
Mm-hmm.
Was there one that started you on this road to this story?
I mean, the book spends most of its time in the head of the narrating character, who's a 12-year-old boy. So by extension, I think it's definitely a coming of age novel before it's anything else. Kind of has to be, too, because we sort of live with him the whole time. And, I've said in a couple of different places that, like, what's great about 12 as an age for a narrator is that they can just kind of interchangeably be 6 or 20, depending on the moment. I'm the parent of an 11-year-old, so I can maybe speak to this a bit, to like, they're just capable of incredible maturity and incredible naivete, too, moment to moment, which is really useful for a narrator. You sort of want to use that and have them be able to have that flexibility too. So it's definitely a coming of age novel in its text, I think, too, as kind of the person, playing with the puppet strings around that text. I'm really interested in baseball's labor history, and I'm interested in baseball's labor history because I think it's I think it's a litmus test for whether you have values or you just have opinions about labor and about value of work and old-fashioned sort of like Marxist considerations about the labor value of work too. Because I think it's really easy to dismiss baseball labor because Shohei Ohtani makes $500 million or something on his contract, so it's hard to like care about baseball labor because of that or anything. The LA Dodgers make way more than $500 million from Shohei Ohtani. So he's only, earning back a portion of the value that he's delivering to his bosses. And beyond him, there's a really narrow and steep climb up to even to middle class sort of livelihoods. There are people who have skills that we can't even imagine as regular folks who, are not athletes, that are struggling to get by in the low minors right now, either as coaches or as players or anything, too, which is really surprising for something that generates so much revenue for capital and everything here. I like talking about baseball because it makes you talk about underlying concepts in class relations and labor relations, and you have to like be comfortable with the idea that that includes the concepts that they apply to people who are millionaires too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, baseball historically presented as America's pastime, right? That like it's Americana.
Mm-hmm.
It is as American as class inequity and labor exploitation, right? That this allows you to explore that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Andrew's book does a great job of talking about that too. I know you had him on talking about field work,
Yes,
too,
yeah.
which I've jokingly referred to as a Northern's nonfiction cousin, because they came out about the same time and they have similar interests. Too, but Andrew does a better job of sort of getting into the details of that because it's it's nonfiction, so that's its primary joy and purpose.
Right. No, obviously, as you said, this is an issue that extends to today, right? Like it's only recently that the minor leagues unionized, right? That we have collective bargaining at that level, and the exploitation and inequity continues, and there are guys earning below minimum wage and subsistence level currently. But setting this in the 50s, what was the decision in terms of, because I know you say in the historical notes that obviously like 52, that's the time of like the first sort of top set. You kind of fudged with the dates in regards to the cards period, but what was the like motivating factor to put this during that?
I did, yeah. The 1952 is the first like really modern Topps baseball card set, which we define as like having essentially like a statistical review on the back instead of like a little narrative bit about the player or trivia about the player or something too. And they were not as ensconced as the sort of characters in the book talk about too. Why did I do that? I did that because I really liked the idea of the two brothers at the center of the story being born on either side of their father's departure for World War II, and the differences in their childhoods growing out of that as well. So Chris, the main character, is born in I think it works out to like 1940 or something, and his brother is born in 1945 or 1946, at the end of the war. The father's absence over the story, because the father dies shortly thereafter, is really important for both the characters and the plot too. I'm really interested in the early 50s because of just the difference between kind of what the inherent kind of historiography of the time requires of it. It's post-war, it's about renewal, it's about rebirth, it's about growth, it's about sort of American exceptionalism, sort of taking charge economically as well as culturally too. But the 21st century would talk about that time as being populated and increasingly run by men and also women suffering from post-traumatic indicators too from the war. And I think a lot of real history of the time talks about that, and a lot of pop history doesn't. And novels kind of are in the latter camp. But I was really interested in taking that seriously too, that like everybody who's an adult, and this is of course in North America, this isn't even in Europe or Asia, where there's a lot more direct involvement by civilians, is kind of living under that. And of course the children are living under it too, because that's how trauma works. It sort of moves, down the family tree.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting
that's a big reason
to hear you say, about choosing the birth dates of Christopher and Mikey, that Christopher having grown up during the war, that there's like a different level of intergenerational trauma that he's experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we get more of it because we're in his head, but that by growing up during the war rather than, with the effects of the war specifically on Mikey, that like their approach to things isn't just dictated by age, but that, how they experienced life during that period.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's this part of the point too. And of course, they're different people as people too. People aren't entirely a product of their, birth month. But I do think that those are, designed to sort of speak to the differences between them that are partly due to age, but also partly due to the circumstances of their birth and their lives. Sort of the age that they are and where the world is, and sort of formative points along the way too.
So obviously they had lost their father, and there's this father figure, Coach, in the book. How did you arrive at, or like how early on did you decide that like this would be your three characters kind of traveling by car, that like this would be the relationship, this would be kind of who the adult in the room was?
Yeah, I liked the kind of ambiguity of the relationship. And if it was a more traditional, he's their dad or something, then we wouldn't necessarily have that ambiguity, or we'd have to sort of grow that ambiguity out in a more sort of forceful way. I think that everyone's first reaction is like, why did this woman let her kids travel across an international border with their baseball coach? What's happening there? And it's surprising and it's strange, and it insinuates that there's more happening in the relationships with everybody mentioned too, but you don't know what. And because your narrator is 12, and because as a 12 they sort of flicker on and off between being 6 and being 20, in that sort of way, you're only getting it in sort of bits along the way, and you sort of require other characters to come in and ask the same questions and sort of figure out with the reader what's happening with all these characters too. Because of course Coach only means what Coach means to Chris when we first meet him. We don't know what Coach means to the mother or to Mikey or to business associates that are coming up, or to the ball players we're going to meet or anything. We have to sort of wait for them to appear to do that. So I like the idea that it sort of starts with this trio in this very sort of close space and everything, and grows out, and that the audience kind of learns the nuances and the reality of relationships in real time, limited this course as well as anything, but the fact that people are going to lie as they go about, who they are and what they mean to each other too. So yeah, I've always liked that in novels. That's sort of like, expanding out the lens in real time and kind of bringing us in to learn along with the characters these things.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is like the ambiguity is purposeful? Like you intentionally create ambiguity to then sift through layers or pull back curtains?
Yeah, I mean, ambiguity is really why novels for me. I think it is the art form, literary art form anyway, that we are most comfortable allowing for ambiguity, moral ambiguity, emotional ambiguity, spiritual ambiguity, and even ambiguity of plot and timing and everything too. And what I like about it is, I come from poetry, right? That's what I sort of wrote most of in the past. And
Mm-hmm.
ambiguity is really easy in poetry because you always have the license to say less. You can always just leave things out as you go, and you always be kind of patted on the back for just saying less as you go, and you'll have this very sort of minimalist result that's delightfully ambiguous, everything. What's sometimes tiresome about that is that it's easy to do and sort of a trick that works pretty well. The novel, and especially this novel, where we spend the entire time in Chris's head, and Chris, is his head is chaotic and, you know, um, irresponsible and all that, but it's full of thoughts about himself and the world around him. So there's no minimalism there. He's thinking a lot of things and going through a lot of emotions and opinions and ideas in real time and building up a lot. So the ambiguity that we end up with is kind of a maximalist ambiguity instead, where he thinks all these things simultaneously about people that maybe seem impossible to hold in your head at the same time. He's bitterly disappointed in Coach, but also attached to him. He's scared of Reg Law, but he's also fascinated by him too. That's the kind of ambiguity that I love in novels, and that's what I really wanted to explore. Is that sort of like, it's not ambiguity because you're not saying things, even though we start in that sort of small world where we don't know very much. By the end of it, we have this ambiguity that is the product of knowing so much about these relationships, but trying to balance things that seem impossible to sort of hold in your head at the same time, but in real human relationships are really common. It's sort of like contradictive uh, ideas and opinions about people live in our heads all the time.
Is that strengthened by having him as 12? Like, do you find that if he was older, we would expect him to have more certainty, but because of his age, as he goes through these things, we're kind of more willing to accept that he's sussing things out and there's not necessarily like a hard and firm perspective?
Yeah, I think what's helpful is that I think he's the age when you first come to understand that you're going to hold these counterbalancing ideas about people and things simultaneously. I think it's the, you know, early adolescence is sort of the dawn point for nuanced uh, opinions about people, places, and things too. And I'm oversimplifying things dramatically because, there's all kinds of examples against a statement like that. But I think that he's coming to experience that discomfort of holding plural thoughts about the people in his life in real time for the first time, or at scale for the first time. And so he's maybe a little fascinated by it as well. So he's a natural narrator for that because he's coming up with these surprising double-headed opinions about the people in his life in real time and explaining them to himself and by extension us as readers.
Yeah, because even, on his occasional phone calls with his mother, I think he starts to appreciate kind of her as a person and not just as like an appendage.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. The mother character is interesting to write because I don't want to just be like an exposition machine, right? There's a version of her that I think is just used to kind of summarize the chapter every time because that's kind of where she is structurally. They're required to call her every night every chapter in the book is a day, so by extension, every chapter ends with a phone call, home more or less, to the mother. I do want her to be a living, breathing person, but she has to kind of do it subtextually because we only see her through this one relationship the whole time, too, right? Like, I think it's insinuated that she lives in a state of compromise with all the things that she's disempowered by in the world, including this relationship with Coach that she has, where he probably said at one point, like, "Hey, I'm going to bring the boys to the States, sorry, to Canada, to see the card business," and she kind of probably felt like she had to say yes because there's a power imbalance in the relationship that sort of dictates it too. Is she in love with Coach? Probably not. Is she doing the best that she can in the cultural, social, and economic reality that she's sort of dropped into as a war widow in the early 50s in Minnesota? Yeah. So she has a whole life. It sort of has to live subtextually. And Chris is helping us a little bit by what you said, basically coming to understand her as a person in real time.
Mhm. You mentioned obviously that each chapter is a day. That how did you land on that structure? Like, was that right there from the start, or as you were writing, did you find that kind of that created breaks for you?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I plotted it out by day. And then once I did that, I had to sort of insert the chapter breaks. And the natural place for it to go would be kind of at the close of the day, too. So it came out it came out of a storybooking exercise that was fairly robust for what is not like a terribly complicated story in terms of chronology or anything. You know, it's one speaker, it's one direction, it's one unit of time. It's, you know, we're not jumping back and forth in, you know, 5 different timelines or anything here. So for a book that doesn't have a lot of that going on, it was quite structured and storyboarded, and I kind of wrote a fairly involved, you know, Bible for it as I was moving things along. Probably that's the first time novelist fear embedded in there of this things getting away from me. But yeah, it seemed fairly natural to have the days be chapters once I knew that the days would be kind of the unit of time that I was starting and ending with for every block of story that I needed to get through.
Do you have a sense that if, you know, having gone through this process now, maybe you wouldn't make quite an extensive Bible going forward for a future novel, that you needed to kind of create some guardrails for yourself?
Maybe, yeah. And you know, it's not my first try by any means. And, you know, they talk about, you know, novelists are either, what is it, plotters or explorers or something. There was some essay about that I read recently. It might be that I'm a plotter, that I need to kind of like really guard things out and organize the whole thing and then go from there. You know, my wife, Alexis von Coningslow, who has a novel coming out next month. Well, it'll be this month, I think, when this goes to air, called The Exclusion Zone. She's a natural novelist, and she can explore. You know, some people think in words, some people think in sentences, some people think in paragraphs, and my wife thinks in 250-page blocks. So she's, you know, much more at ease, I think, with the format because of that. I might get there at some point, but in my failed attempts prior to this, I attempted to be an explorer and then explored my way into corners I couldn't get out of too. So I think for the next one, I will at least start storyboarding. I would like to be the kind of novelist who can wander, though, because I think that there's a lot to get out of that. And you don't want to self-limit, and you always want to sort of be able to do different things and new things. So that might require letting go of the guardrails a little bit more.
Is that coming out of being a poet, that you have more liberty to kind of wander in poetry because it's, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you can't break that much in a poem, right? Once you start assembling a collection, maybe you can cause problems for yourself, but that's somewhat light. You know, I just wasn't used to situations where, you know, I make what feels like an innocuous change on page 18 and it completely breaks page 244 or something too. And it doesn't really happen in a poem because it's all happening on the same page or two as well. You can kind of see it in real time. But that I wasn't really prepared for as well and benefited from being able to kind of, it's also, I think, tied into how I work just as a person too. I spent a very long time very slowly assembling kind of the storyboard Bible document, right? So we're talking about like a 20-page, 25-page document with all kinds of information about the characters that never makes it into the book too, and details of what I want to have happen and how and when and in what order and everything too. It took a long time. I mean, it spent on and off, 5 to 10 years doing it. Not every day or anything, but here and there as I go. And then I wrote the first draft very quickly. That might just be how I work, right? Or it might just be how I work this time. I'm hesitant to, as someone who has written one finished novel and a handful of unfinished ones, declare myself an expert in my own process, because I think I know less about it than I know about it at this point.
It sounds like if you were opening a pack of baseball cards and you got a checklist, you'd actually appreciate having that.
Yep. It would be. I would not roll my eyes at the checklist card like I did when I was 11, too. If I got one now. We had junk wax for the launch here. I didn't get a checklist card, but I got a Kirby Puckett, which went missing. Someone's got it. They went home with it, I guess. So we'll have to track that Kirby Puckett down in real time.
You mentioned Andrew.
I got a Billy Ripken, but not the Billy Ripken.
Oh, not the
folks.
No, I mean that card. That's a valuable card.
And I saw the back before I saw the front, so I did a little heart palpitation when I saw it because I was super excited. But it was not that one, sadly. It was a G-rated Billy Ripken.
You mentioned Andrew Forbes. He loves the '87 Topps series, which I'm a huge fan of as well. Do you have a favorite?
The '80s basement one with the
wood grain
paneling stuff. Yeah. I like that one very much too. I think everyone's answer is like the collection that they started collecting. So I remember my dad bringing home the 1990 Score set. My dad worked at a grocery store his whole life, and he would get visits from the like Kraft peanut butter salesman or something, or the mac and cheese guy.
Oh, when they had the promo cards?
Yeah, so what I actually had growing up were like the factory cut versions of those and like fancy binders and stuff. Like I have all of the, like the Felix Potvin top of the peanut butter lid circular goaltender set that came out one year in like the early 90s or something. I have that still somewhere and all those guys. So those are the ones that are closest to my heart. Those like kind of like breakfast cereal tie-in ones too.
Sure. Yeah. No, I have an uncut triptych of Zeller's Expos cards, and certainly
that stuff.
Appreciate the stuff. This book obviously has an appreciation for that era and for cards in general. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the Northern, Jacob.
Yeah, Michael, I had a great time. Thank you very much for having me.